All right, 6:01, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the April 10th, 2023 version of the Fountain Hills Planning and Zoning Commission. If you would all rise with us for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Thank you. All right, Paula, roll call, please.
Commissioner Ford,
Here.
Commissioner DePaul,
Here.
Commissioner Dempster,
Here.
Commissioner Kovacevic,
Here.
Commissioner Watts,
Here.
Vice Chairman Schlossberg,
Here.
Chairman Gray.
Here, thank you, Paula. Agenda item 3, call to the public. Paula, do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, Chairman, 2 speakers.
Thank you.
In order of appearance, Larry Myers and Crystal Kavanaugh.
Chair, commissioners, what else is new? So, we have a new business coming to town, Fountain Hills, Imani Wellness LLC. Actually, they're a new property owner, 17100 East Shea, Fire Rock Business Center. They bought 2 parcels. No problem with that, right? Be a property owner here in Fountain Hills. Big problem with their business. They're licensed as a outpatient treatment center with the state, quote, intensive outpatient treatment programs, IOP, for substance abuse and mental health disorders in Arizona, as the main headline on their webpage. So this is a full-blown detox facility. That would make 3 if you count Angel Heart, Fountain Hills Recovery, and this one. And they're run by nurse practitioners who can prescribe and administer drugs, so we know what that's all about. So simple enough, they fall under the new ordinance, C2, C3, provided they meet all the parameters to serve the community and whatever. 17100 East Shea is not C2, C3, it's C1. So let's see if we can get any boxes checked for C1. And I only bring this up because we seem to have a tendency to sort of make some things up as we go along with some of this stuff. Certain council members like to see if they can manipulate the town ordinances. Neighborhood commercial and professional district is established to provide a location for modest, well-designed commercial enterprises to serve the surrounding residential neighborhood. Doubt it. As well as to provide services to the community, maybe, and to provide for the appropriate location of professional offices throughout the community. The intent of the district is to integrate limited commercial activity and professional offices with residential land uses in a climate favorable to both. Hardly think that's going to happen with a bunch of imported drug addicts to Fountain Hills. Particular attention is to be paid to the interface between these uses within the same neighborhood. So they're not going to serve the surrounding neighborhood. I guarantee you, I know most of the people down in the Monterey condos and townhouses, and I didn't know any drug addicts down there. So we'll just check that box off. That's not happening. I don't know how many drug addicts these groups think we have in Fountain Hills, but we already have Fountain Hills Recovery. So do we need 2? Do we need 3? Because there's Angel Heart sitting in the wings over there. And I can't see how any of these integrate with a climate favorable to both residents and the commercial, surrounding commercials. So I just want to make my case for a case closed, no license to be given to these people in that location. And then I'd ask the same question, how many detox facilities do we need in Fountain Hills? Thanks.
Thank you.
I would say some of the same things, no doubt, but for the record, I would like to repeat some of them. That Imani Wellness provides intensive outpatient program services to clients who struggle with mental health and substance abuse disorders. It's an intensive outpatient addiction program, and the treatment structure is such that they go there for treatment, and it's allowing the person to live at home. Some begin with intensive outpatient substance abuse treatment, or it could be a step-down care following inpatient treatment. And according to their own website, both can be life-changing to a person's recovery journey. I also want to reiterate what Larry says, that, well, he didn't tell you, but the founder and the clinical director are mental health nurse practitioners. So that is very important because that's a clear step in outpatient drug treatment programs. The C1 office building in this Red Rock Business Center, it's located behind MCO Realty office, near Desert Title, near our Visitors Center, and among other small businesses. And like he said, it was recently sold to this Imani Wellness. And C1 is zoned in such a manner as to serve the surrounding residential neighborhood. It's not meant to be detrimental in any way. And it does not include behavioral health. And what's happening in Fountain Hills? Why is there such a surge in behavioral health businesses from elsewhere attempting to set up shop in these non-conforming zones? And like he said, their zoning indicates they're outpatient treatment centers. And I don't understand even why the realtors are selling these places to these businesses. Are they completely unaware of our zoning ordinances here? I mean, it's their job as professionals to know this, I would think. And if they do know this and hope that they can get special use permits, that's just not the way to go about it. I don't know if we need some realtor education about our zoning. And I will end on this, that I'm not really sure what they plan to do. Maybe they're just buying up office space. But if they do want to practice behavioral health and import more and more people with substance abuse problems, that's not going to benefit our community. In fact, we don't even have a sufficient number of people who need this level of treatment. And like Larry also said, we have an ordinance just recently passed that covers most of this. And so I too would urge any denial of any future business application for behavioral health in this zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to agenda item 4, consideration and possible action to approve the regular meeting minutes from the March 13th venue. Commissioners, any comments or a motion, please? Commissioner Dexter.
I would like to make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission March 13th, 2023 meeting.
Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
7-0.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 5, public hearing and consideration of possible action on ordinance 2306, the site plan review ordinance, repealing and replacing section 2.04 site plan review regulations. Mr. Wesley.
Commissioners, good evening. Hopefully we can go through this one fairly quickly. We reviewed this 2 months ago, and you gave me some initial input at that time. We scheduled it for a public hearing last month, but due to the lateness of the meeting, we continued it on to this one. So just quickly, again, we are looking at going through each of the sections in Chapter 2 of the zoning ordinance, which deals with the various procedures for rezone, site plans, special use permits, so forth. You've previously reviewed and council's approved amendment with regard to the special use permit process, and this is a section that deals with site plans and how those are proposed. Overall, we're attempting to develop greater consistency with the different sections within this chapter so that it's easier to administer them and for people looking for information to follow them and find what they're needed, what's needed with each one. So in section 2.04, dealing with site plans, section A of that deals with the purpose and applicability provisions. It has been amended to provide some additional reference to chapter 19 of the architectural review guidelines, require site plan review prior to construction plan review, and highlight the benefit of the reviewing of the compliance with zoning early on, and amended to include a requirement for redevelopment of expanding our existing businesses. In section 2.02, there's in what I provided to the commission earlier, I failed to catch a change to make it consistent with the special use permit, which I added here after our meeting discussion a couple months ago with regard to the electronic application submittals. And so that's been provided. Going on to some of the things that were discussed at your meeting a couple of months ago that we have changed. So in section B3C, Romanet 6, and then in D 5, 6, and 15, we added references as requested to some of the other sections of the code, so it'd be easier to find where those provisions are located. In section C1, we changed the word review to evaluate to get rid of the duplication of the use of the word review. In section F, we added some language to clarify that site plans or buildings which previously had site plan review will require submission of site plan amendment. And then added to G clarification that when we had the special use permits, that it would include the planning and zoning. It wasn't just going straight to council. So those were some of the things that the commissioners identified in your previous review as needing some clarification. So we've made those modifications. Any questions or comments that the commission has with this ordinance that has been revised?
Commissioner Watts?
Two things. In section B, I think I'd suggest adding or authorized agent of the owner. Quite often the contractor, the developer, whoever is actually doing the work isn't the actual owner and they're the agent. So adding that type of verbiage gives you a little bit of latitude to allow for submission.
Sure. Chairman and Commissioner, the way we address that is if it's somebody acting on behalf of an owner, we still have them have the owner provide us a letter saying they've authorized the person. So we're still getting something from the owner.
Yeah, I just didn't see anything in there that
the applicant can do it.
suggested that, so, okay. The other question I had was, I thought that in section F1, A, B, and C, it seemed to me that in order of egregiousness, so to speak, A seems to be the most minor, and yet it's a 10% penalty, so to speak, of, for if I added one piece of landscaping. The change in the footprint of the building, it could be nominal, it could be a small utility room. So it's pretty ticky-tack in my estimation. The height of the building, I think, is a problem. But it seemed that the penalties that are imposed, even though they are, I mean, they're half, is really what it comes down to for something that could be fairly minor. Do we really want to be that aggressive with penalties, so to speak?
Chairman, Commissioner, so we're defining here a minor site plan that can be reviewed administratively versus having to, or that because it's so minor that we're not going to charge you the full review fee because it's not going to involve so much change. And certainly there are things that we will look at that are even so minor than that we'll say, no, you can just go straight to the building permit and we won't even do the site plan modification. So I think that will really handle those really very minor things. But if you'd like us to go back and look at this and see if we can't maybe add a third category.
It's just a suggestion. I mean, if you have your coffee in the morning, you're in a good mood, you'll wave it by, and if you don't, maybe it's going to cost you a fortune. So it could be. A little facetiousness, maybe. So I think I'd like to see it.
But you apply it as a penalty. I see it as a discount.
It's half of, they charge 1/2 for amendments. And if you have a minor change of 10% of the landscaping, you get to pay 1/2 of the original permit fee. That's how I read it.
Site plan review fee.
Site plan review fee, right. So if I was a contractor, I would not even submit it if I had a landscaping issue, and I'm gonna put a bush in or move something and just marginally change it, then I'd let it up to site inspections. And I don't know that I would make a big stink out of the footprint if I was just going to add a utility room. But I think that some of those are a bit aggressive.
It's a landscape area, not landscaping. So just changing out landscaping wouldn't matter, it's only if you're changing landscape area, reducing the amount of landscape area.
Still. I'm open for thoughts, arguments, support.
I don't see it as monumental as you do, but
Yeah, I don't know what the fee is. I think it changes based upon the actual development, doesn't it, and the scope, the size?
Yeah, Chair, Commissioner Paul, I don't know how much you'll remember, but there's a base fee of an amount plus then so much per acre over 5 acres, but I don't remember what those numbers are without looking them up. For site plan review, you don't see them often enough to remember exactly what they are, but it does go up with the size of a site. So another option here is if it's a 50% change in landscape area versus a 10%, or make it 25%, or going to increase those percentages. And some of those, that would be fine.
is review time tracked, John? I mean, could it be done on level of effort?
I mean, that's certainly possible, Chairman. We don't really track our review time that closely currently. We require fees to be paid up front before we do the review.
So on that note, and maybe where he's going with this is, do we need to have the fee? I would almost rather them let us know if there was the 10% change, but maybe not the fee.
That's another option. We could discount it even more if it's a minor change.
Yeah.
No fee, or 10% instead of half, or anything, whatever you'd like to do.
Do site plans always done administratively, or do they go third party?
The planning portion, site plans are always done administratively by staff to this point.
I don't know what you think, but I'd be amenable to level of effort or at cost if done through a third party.
If you can stipulate what level of effort is based on what an hourly rate, then I'm fine with that. I
How
just,
much coffee did you have?
really, exactly. But-
Chairman, would you be interested in knowing what the fees are charged?
Yes, ma'am.
So for commercial, industrial, and multifamily site plan review, it's $680 for the first 5,000 square feet of the property, and then $130 for every 1,000 square feet thereafter.
So it's nominal in the grand scheme of things.
Well, if you're the contractor paying it, it's not nominal. It adds up. Each of those items add up, and it's, when you walk up and you've got a 5-acre piece of property and, I get to pay $300 because I want to move my landscaping around a bit.
So I would say for the $100, it might be worth it for them to just let us know of the changes, but are we really going to charge them that fee? Make it simple and not have that.
Well, if it was John making the decision, he wouldn't charge it, I'm sure. Again, it's just a comment, and it just, one of those things that jumped out at me and said, seemed like a penalty for what could be a very minor change.
So if you just take the first one, change in landscape area or open space of less than 10%, so at 11%, you're into full resubmission fees, right?
Correct. And again, there's no magic to these numbers. These
Yeah.
percentages, they can go up or down.
Then I go with Commissioner Watts. I could be okay with nothing below 10%, but 10% being the cutoff, and you go full fee above that. I don't have objection to that, unless it's done by third party and the town incurs cost for those reviews.
And do we want to clarify if it's, if it's increasing or decreasing? Because if they're increasing their open space, obviously we would encourage that versus have them come and pay a fine for that, right?
Chairman, Commissioner, I see where you're going with that, and possibly, but anything that's, the more that there's something changing then on the site, something that's been paved area now is becoming landscape area. And so that's affecting parking and circulation, so we're looking at something with it, even though it's, at least in theory, standing here, probably for the good.
So if they had an opportunity to put a little more landscaping, and they said, you know what, let's not do it, it's gonna cost us $100, let's just make an extra parking space. I don't know. Sounds kind of funny to me, but.
I think we're trying to create and make something out of something that's really simple.
Yeah.
What happens if it's more than 10%?
Full fee.
Then it's
You
a
go full fee?
Full site plan review and full fee, yes.
For all three situations?
Yes.
I think the landscaping, if it was, I wouldn't even include the landscaping component because that's fairly minor. The building size, the footprint, and the height, I think, are the ones I'm more concerned about and to be, I guess, more tolerant of. They should have known that up front. But the landscaping can change once you start doing infrastructure and your site work. Change marginally, but 10% is pretty easy to get to. So I think I'd eliminate 10%.
In change or in area change? Because this is just specific to area.
It's area. It depends when the site guy is there and they're making modifications, changes, what they run into underground, the types of soils that they run into, that type of thing. So it could change. So I just don't think that a 10% threshold for landscaping warrants 50%, and I'll call it a penalty, for trying to accommodate the conditions of the site. But I'm fine with the 10% on the footprint and the 10% on the height.
And I'm not going to get in the way of it. If you feel strongly about that.
Yes, I qualified it. I said it's a suggestion. How often does it happen? Do you have any idea, John?
So, under the current ordinance, that's one of the challenges. We don't have any provisions for how to handle modifications to site plans. And so, we basically treat everything as a new site plan.
So this is actually, you could consider it a savings. If you had to go back in for a site plan review, you would save money.
There today because you won't have to charge the full fee.
See how he just spun that psychology on you.
He did. Just ruined my argument, so.
Well, your argument's valid. Your argument is valid. I just,
Yes, Chairman, and I agree. And it's, changing that, another way to look at it, we'll up that one to 25% or 50% instead of 10%. I think
Then I'd go 25, support 25. I think 25 you could actually calculate. 10%, I think it'd be a little bit of a struggle. And I don't know if I was a contractor, if I would come back in for the 10% and say, look at this again. And I don't think that the inspector may or may not catch it. So, yeah, so I don't know. But I think 25% would give you a lot more latitude.
specifically on F1A.
Just on one, yes, F1A.
I'm supportive of that. Commissioner Kovacevic, thoughts?
Yeah, I think 10% cuts it too narrow. I would support 25%.
Commissioner Watts, it's your motion.
I would move to approve with the consideration that should we put in, the question again, should we make it clear that the owner's agent is responsible or allowed to submit on behalf, or?
That's our standard procedure.
Is it?
As long as we have something from the owner saying I'm authorized to.
Then I would move to approve with the change in percentage for the landscaping component for 25% instead of 10.
Second, commissioners?
I will second that.
All right, the motion from Commissioner Watts is to forward a recommendation of approval with a modification to 6-1A to increase that to 25%. Seconded by Commissioner DePauw. All in favor?
Aye.
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 7-0.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, number 6, ordinance 2305, parking ordinance, repealing and replacing chapter 7, parking and loading requirements.
Chairman, excuse me, Chairman, Commissioners. Again, we've been talking about this one for, I think, over a year now. Kind of starting and stopping with it a little bit. We reviewed it a couple of months ago, and the commission was fairly satisfied with most things. We had a few minor items the commission wanted some adjustments on, which we were prepared to talk about last month again until we took a little longer on the other agenda item. So I'll move through this fairly quickly, but certainly you can slow me down where needed. The overall goal here was to remove some errors and inconsistencies between various portions of Chapter 7 parking to improve the overall readability and flow of the ordinance, update some standards, and add a few new provisions where needed. This shows the existing or current layout of the ordinance versus the revised layout. And so one of the discussions we had last time with regard to the introductory provisions was trying to allow a little bit more creativity and flexibility with regard to permeable paving and shared parking. So we added some additional language there in the purpose statements with regard to that compared to what had been in the previous draft. Section 702C, this wording in this section has been adjusted slightly to conform with the new ordinance. Again, in this section, as we looked at it and talked about the engineer's ability to look at alternative paving, it was suggested we add some language there. And so we have that in revisions or use of alternative paving must still not violate the county environmental DEQ regulations. And then in the section, we also added, with regard to maintenance of parking areas, added some wording that must be consistent with the approved plan. I think that came from a staff comment as I was reviewing this with our code officers, that having that reference back to the original approval would be helpful in their enforcement capabilities. Going on in 703, which is general regulations. Again, this provides some of the basic parameters for all parking lots, and things here were moved around a little bit as they apply to both standard residential and commercial parking lots to keep things clear. Different illustrations were updated as well. Section 704 now addresses the design standards for residential uses, so this is up through 4 units on a property. We talked about this last time. One of the provisions being added is the requirement for covered parking spaces. And one of the impacts of this is that it may limit garage conversions if you don't have another place on site to have covered parking in a residential area, single-family residential area. Section 705 deals with standards for multi-residence and non-residential uses. So again, most of the things were kept the same, but there were a few things that were added, things that we discussed previously. Again, requiring the covered parking for multifamily and for business office uses. One of the things that we discussed before is in trying to look at the design of the parking lot and where we should have cross aisles and spaces would back into the entry drive. The draft ordinance had a 50-foot separation based on discussion from council, and this shows what that was before, or based on discussion from the commission. Commission suggests we reduce that to 30 feet, and so that was done in the revised ordinance that you have. Going on in that one, again, the information with regard to landscaping was a little bit scattered in the previous ordinance, so we've consolidated it into one place and updated some of the graphics provided with that. We also looked at the opportunity to better utilize the shared parking, and there's a provision for shared parking in the town center code, so we decided to reference that in order to provide the same information. One of the comments that came up last time was that we didn't really cover driving ranges, and maybe we didn't have quite enough spaces allowed for golf courses, so made this amendment after looking at several other ordinances to see how they handle them. So 6 spaces per T plus driving range, and driving range is 2.5 per driving T. So that addresses what those concerns were. And then going through, there were no other changes in any of the other updated parking standards that were discussed. The last section that we had that's had some discussion had to do with providing a requirement for getting some infrastructure in place for electric vehicle parking. And so, again, after looking through a variety of other ordinances, there's not too many that cover this topic, but it did come up with this option that's included in the draft ordinance. That would, again, it's mostly aimed at encouraging the, in these situations, we have 50 more parking spaces, that some electrical vehicle capacity be put in place. In this case, minimum of 10 required parking spaces. And this would be the wording about what they would include with their building plans to show how they could then provide for that electrical service in the future, but doesn't necessarily require that anything be put in up front. I believe that's kind of the main one. As we talk about this one, is this something we really need to do at this time or not? It seems like it could be beneficial, but again, it may be a challenge. I think Commissioner Watts, you brought it up last time, trying to calculate that electrical load and really providing for it up front when you may or may not need it. Maybe too much to ask. So if you want to include this is, I guess, this current staff recommendation, if you want to include it, is this type of language, but also don't have a concern if you want to not include it in the ordinance.
Commissioner Corey.
Yes, thank you. Wasn't sure if it was our turn yet. I would like to include this because I think, we're planning, we should start to incorporate this kind of stuff. John, where did we come up with the 50? Just curious, is that like an average, is that the average parking lot size for a large business or something, or?
Chairman, Commissioner Corey, I think I probably saw it in a couple other codes or something in the range of 50. It's trying to look at something that would be a large enough development that the cost of doing this would start to make sense. Is that too high, too low? Again, there's no real scientific basis behind 50. So it's certainly flexible to move that up or down depending upon how the commission felt it should go.
The way this is worded, if they came in, if there was a new development with 40 spaces, would this apply? Or is it's the 50 is the minimum? Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just questioning if maybe it could be worded in a different way that doesn't, this way it makes them get to that 50 minimum in order for this to be applicable.
You're suggesting the threshold be removed or lowered?
Yeah, because I'm trying to think about different businesses in town, and 50 is a lot. How many places do we have that there's 50 spaces?
If we go back up here to our table, just a second, and just look, if I can find it quickly. Standard office space, 1 per 250 square feet. So 50 times 250 is, whatever that is, 12,000 square foot office space.
Okay.
Is that my quick math? Is that correct? You'd be at that size of an office before you'd be required to do this. Relatively large office. I think get down to typical retail, I think is 1 per 350. So again, they're going to be a little bit larger developments.
Okay.
I agree with Commissioner Corey. I mean, I like the intent behind it. I have a little different take. I think that the market will drive the placement of EV charging stations on its own. and I think it's an evolving market. We started at garage chargers, and then we went to level 1 chargers, and I think that's what we've got installed here in town. And now, now vehicles are requiring level 2 chargers, and God knows if we're gonna get to level 3 or 4 or 5.
Yeah, they're level 3s.
I just think that, I just don't wanna constrain what becomes a good business decision anyway. So I'm not opposed to keeping it in there. I wonder if we actually do ourselves a disservice by including it, because the market should
Want to do it.
ultimately wants, right, should
Yeah.
want to do that anyway.
See that.
At the point in time when that becomes legitimate or legitimized. Commissioner Watts?
Well, I'm of the opinion you got to start somewhere. So if you start at 50, it is a rather large, you'd preclude somebody like a Walgreens or a CVS. I don't think they quite hit 50. They probably something smaller than that, so maybe 40. But I think if you put a proviso in there that said there's an opportunity for a waiver, because if you had a large building and it was simply storage and you've got 2 or 3 people that are working storage, then you don't have the need for 50 or for 5 or even 4 if you put 40 in there instead. So I think you have to look at it from a common sense standpoint, and I think this is going to be changing. It's going to be real dynamic over time. So it's going to grow. Start somewhere. Maybe move it down to 40 with that proviso that said you've got an opportunity for waiver if you can justify it. You can provide some validation.
Well, on that basis, why not eliminate the threshold altogether and just go to a ratio like we do with the rest of our requirements? You got 10 spaces, you provide 1 EV charging point.
Yeah. It's kind of along the
Kinda
lines I
meets-
was thinking.
Yeah, it gets what you're looking for, it scales it.
Still works.
I just think we have to be careful that the technology and the need is going to outpace our words here. So we need to
Right.
be able to we need to allow you the flexibility to apply what's relevant 5 years from now.
And it's not a requirement, the 1 for 10, but it's it's the recommendation.
So, right, and the requirement in 2 really is that their construction documents provide for it. Putting in the equipment that's necessary doesn't require them to actually install it.
Yeah.
Until they have an actual need for it, but at least they have a plan for it up front.
Yeah, I just want to share, I had a friend visit me from California recently, and we went to lunch at Euro, and he has a Tesla. And there's no place for him to charge it. And he was heading back to California after breakfast. We had to leave Fountain Hills and go to Kierland Common and walk around just so he could charge his car to be able to get back home. It's so inconvenient. He should have been able to do it right here. But we only have 2 level 1 chargers, and there's no place for him to possibly even charge. So, just a comment. I don't think it goes here, but just something to think about, Yeah.
What's a final thought here on this provision?
I don't know how you can create a schedule at this point. I think you got to put something in there. Maybe just the 10% of the site's work, the allocated space is 10% to be required for, but I still think you need that provision in there that says there's a waiver based upon the practicality of the parking spaces that are actually going to be used.
Sure.
So that's one comment. I had one other comment before we go too far, and that is, how do we notify those that have visibility obstructions today? We've addressed it in the code, the regulations. How do we advise the infractor?
Chairman, Commissioner, as they're identified, our code enforcement officers will go by the property and talk to the tenant and or property owner.
And they give them a grace period to rectify it? Okay.
Commissioner Kovacevic, any input?
Yeah. I know when we looked at it about 5 years ago, I want to say shopping center in North Scottsdale. I know one thing, to put in Tesla charger, the Tesla brand chargers, you had to pay Tesla to get them into your parking lot. Now, there were other third-party vendors that would pay you to put their chargers in the parking lot, but you had to put in the infrastructure, which was, it could be expensive. It could be very inexpensive, depending on how close to the power source you happen to be. What I don't want us to, I don't think that the parking should drive the construction or the feasibility of building the building. And so I would prefer to see some minimum level before the charging stations were required. And I also agree with Chairman Gray that the economics will drive it. At some point, if the office building, if enough people are driving electric cars, that the office building, that's a real benefit for people to lease space in the office building, then the owner of the office building will put it there whether we require it or not. So I'm really okay with being silent on it.
And I think that's where I'm also comfortable. As long as there's some wiggle room for staff within the language, I guess the language doesn't bother me, but I'm kind of in that same vein of the market will drive it. And this language to me is more about master plan development, anchor type scenarios and/or public development. It's more guidelines for Plat 208 and, Fountain Hills to develop over time. So I'm indifferent.
I still think you got to start somewhere. I think you have to have something because you don't have to put the charging stations in. You have to put the structure in for the charging stations. So when the requirement is there, you have the ability without tearing everything up. It actually is a benefit to the owner long-term because you've got the underground in. I don't think the calculations are right at a 40 amp circuit being nearby. They may support one unit, but it's not going to support multiples. So just advising a contractor up front, to me, seems to be more prudent. I'd like something in there to establish a baseline, and then let's fix the baseline as things continue to change.
Yep, I'll agree. I happen to have an EV, and I can talk to several points. The charging stations we have in town, honestly, are a joke, and it would take hours to charge, even marginally charge your car. So putting infrastructure in that might not even be worthwhile, as you're saying, doesn't necessarily make sense. And it needs to be a supercharger, which is what Tesla has, or like an Electrify America charger. And I don't know what's involved in the conduit to be able to wire it is the same. So yeah, that's kind of where I am on it as well.
40 to 48 amps
Per unit.
per unit. Well, commissioners, a motion?
I would just say one last comment. I think having it in here shows that we're aware of it and we're thinking about these things and we're trying to be inclusive of having this kind of infrastructure, so. For sure. Yeah.
And I'm fine with it with staff discretion.
Mm-hmm.
Your motion. Yeah.
Is it just approval?
Oh, sorry, I guess I should ask Paul, do we have any speaker cards?
No, Chairman.
Sorry. Got excited there for a second. Agenda item 6, ordinance 2305.
All right, so I am looking for it, 2305. Okay, so I guess we'll make a motion to recommend approval of the ordinance 2305, the parking requirements, with the amendment of removing the 50 minimum threshold parking lot size.
Staff discretion.
With staff discretion. Thank you.
A second, Commissioners?
Second.
Any amendments? Everybody good? Okay, Commissioner Corey's motion on ordinance 2306 is to forward a recommendation to approve with the modification to allow for staff discretion and to remove the minimum space threshold from the language. Let's do a roll call vote, Paula.
Commissioner Corey,
Yes.
Commissioner DePaul,
Aye.
Commissioner Dempster,
Aye.
Commissioner Kovacevic,
Nay.
Commissioner Watts,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Schlossberg,
Aye.
Chairman Gray,
Aye.
6-1.
Thank you, Paula. Okay, agenda item 7, another public hearing and consideration, possible action on amendments to the zoning ordinance, chapter 6, sign regulations.
Okay, Chairman and Commissioners, the Town Council has asked staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider possible amendments to the sign ordinance. The Town Council has, through some input and discussion at the council retreat a couple of months ago, identified some things they believe might be beneficial to make as amendments to our current sign regulations. Their goal is to remove some obstacles or impediments that might happen with businesses that could be more successful if they had opportunities for some better signage, particularly in terms of some of the temporary signage options that are available. So I have received and included in the draft that's been provided to you, and is in the report and discussion, some suggestions, recommendations from the Town Council. In addition to that, staff has worked with the ordinance and looked through the suggestions. We've identified a few things that we think you ought to consider also as you go through this. And certainly the public may have some, the commission may have some ideas too, as long as we're making changes. So what we have here to start with this evening are some of those things that have already been identified, but we'll be seeking your further direction for any additional modifications or adjustments from where we're at. And so we'll be going through each section, most of them fairly quickly, where there have not been any identified changes, but bringing them all up because the entire code has been put out there as a possibility for modification, so I don't want to miss anything if somebody has comments. So section 601 of the ordinance is the introductory chapter. This slide lists the topics covered in this particular chapter. We have not identified any proposed changes in this particular section. And so, commissioners, as you've looked at it, have you seen anything here that you think should be considered for amendment or modification in section 601? Hearing none. Okay. We can move on to the exciting section 602, definitions chapter of the ordinance. And here we have one fairly simple and very good suggestion that was made. Concern is somebody not really familiar with the sign ordinance is reading through this and they see a definition, in this case for awning or canopy sign, and they read that and they don't realize there are more detailed regulations elsewhere, and they think that's it. So for each of the sign types, I'll just use this simple one right here as an example, but for each one, then we've added a reference to where you go in the later part of the code to really see the details on that sign type. So that's a suggestion and only modification for each of those sign types at this point in section 602. Any questions, comments with that? Okay. Section 603. Turn some pages here so I keep up. Section 603 deals with the building permits and fees. And here, as staff was going back through this, section 603B is about building permits are not required for certain things. They're not required for temporary signs. Well, building permits aren't required for banner signs either, so we think that just should come out because permits are required for banner signs, but not a building permit. So just making that clarification by taking out the except banner signs. That's our only suggested change in 603. Anybody have anything else they want to bring up with 603? Okay, and 604 deals with violations and penalties. We have not identified any particular changes there. Anybody have any questions, comments on 605? 604, 605, enforcement and remedies. No proposed changes in this section. Commissioners, anything you've identified? Okay, 606, sign plans. This allows for some flexibility modification of the requirements. If somebody wants to submit a sign plan. We have not, again, identified any changes to this section. Any from the commissioners in this section? It's going to slow down here in just a second. Okay. 607, general regulations. So this section provides a lot of background information about different issues related to signs. On this slide, you see the different topics covered in this particular section. And there are several modifications that are proposed as we go through this section. So the first one is in section 607B1. Section 607B deals with sign location and prohibited locations, more particularly, because of some changes being proposed later on in the ordinance in 608 with regard to signs, temporary signs in the right-of-way. It was felt that some slight changes were helpful here to work better with the language later on in terms of the exceptions or what the basic requirement is that signs be placed on the property where the business is versus being off-site, but then explaining the exceptions that would be allowed.
I don't know if here is the proper place to talk about it or later, but I guess if we're going to modify this, I would be in favor of a carve-out for adjacent right-of-way, but not the removed right-of-way. And I think the laser drive example was made. Do you want to talk about that later or here? Later?
We'll
Okay.
get to that in a minute when we talk about specific types. So hold on to that.
Commissioner Dempster.
Thank you. John, is this the area where, I couldn't tell if this was just commercial, but for the homeowner that wants to sell their house and put a sign up in the right-of-way?
So this starts it, but that again will be when we specifically talk about the post and board signs
Okay.
and what the allowance are there. I assume that's what you're
Yes.
referring to, is that type of sign.
Thank you.
So this doesn't really change much, but the feeling was this slight readjustment of the language. We think will make it more clear later on. Okay, so the next part of this section, section 607B2, describes prohibited locations for signs. And the concern here was that it was a lot of technical language that was maybe hard to follow. Things kind of seemed to bounce around a little bit in terms of the types of locations. And so what we've done here to try to clarify this a little bit more is to group the prohibited locations into the types listed so that then you can see them a little bit better and how they work together. There's nothing changed in any of these. It's just reordering them. There might be some slight wording changes because of the way the order was changed, but really there's no difference in the regulations except for the very last one. And that's currently the code says temporary signs within the Shea Boulevard right-of-way are prohibited. This starts to allow the exception that we'll talk about again a little bit more in detail when we get to the specific sign types. Any questions on these changes in 607? Let's see. Might have already covered this. Oh, yeah, so we did also look at adding one more provision in here in 602 AI. As we learned in the last election cycle, there's a lot of confusion between our local ordinance and the state statutes and what they allow for political signs, which start as a challenge because they still refer to political signs, which is regulation by content, which we really can't do. But to try to help clarify a little bit, we thought if we added this other provision more directly in here, that again, during the election times, those signs would be allowed as provided for in the state statutes.
Commissioner Watts?
John, what is the definition of stop and start times? 30 days before, 60, 90? I think you have to clean them up after 14 days after the election, I think.
Chairman, Commissioner Watts, as I recall, it's 70 days prior to the primary. I think it's changed a little bit, but it used to be 60. I think now it's 70 days prior to the primary and then 15 days after the general election, I believe are the dates.
Okay, do we stipulate that anywhere in here, or is it just we're going to follow it?
Just by referencing state statutes, that way if it
Okay.
changes in state statute, we're still good.
All right, thank you.
So this modification is opening up what are currently sign-free zones during that window of time.
Sign-free zones would still be sign-free zones. Sign-free zones may change. There's been some efforts on the state legislature to modify those and what they could be. We may be coming back to change those at some point. Let me go back and find the actual place in here. Right, so it's, again, in 607B2A, Romanet 1(3), so that section is, signs are prohibited within the following locations, are prohibited in town, rights-of-way, or public property, except then as allowed by state statutes during elections or the town sign-free zone. Any questions? Okay with that? Okay. Let's see here. I already covered this one. So that's a change to the except as specifically provided. The Shea right-of-way, Shea Boulevard right-of-way. So again, we can talk about this a little bit more specifically later, but just wanted to cover here as we are looking for these opportunities to help businesses with their signage, the reasons why we have limited the temporary signs on Shea Boulevard. There's been three main reasons, or four. The aesthetic reason, to maintain the beauty of this corridor through town, but more specifically for some safety reasons. These signs, they are placed on or maybe not very securely in the right-of-way, so there's some danger as cars whiz by at 50-plus miles per hour or other wind conditions of blowing the signs into the right-of-way. Most of these signs are smaller signs, and so the printing on them is fairly small. They're meant to be viewed at slow speeds or even more particularly by pedestrians. And so a car going that fast, a driver will have a hard time reading the signs without potentially slowing down. And then also a person placing these signs by the roadway with the high traffic speeds. So again, those have been the reasons why we've had the provisions on Shea Boulevard. So I just want to keep those in mind as we look at the allowances that are being considered at this time. In 607E, for some clarity and consistency added in this chapter to a couple of provisions. And then also in E12, we're not sure why we had the except as specifically permitted, because they're never specifically permitted on somebody's property without the property owners. You can have them in the right-of-way adjacent to it, but not on the property. So suggest we take out that language. So in 607, general regulations, any other things any commissioners have identified that you want to talk about? With that, we're going to get into the more specific sign types and the proposals there that have been discussed. So, section 608 deals with all the specific regulations for the different sign types starting in A. So number one, and that is the A-frame signs. So we had several suggestions here for modifications. Currently, we allow one A-frame sign per business. It suggested we increase that to 2 at 1 per entry. We also suggested that currently the largest sign is 6 square feet, that increasing it to 2, we don't necessarily double that to allowing you 12 square feet, but that we, if you're going to have a second sign, it's got to be a little bit smaller. So the aggregate between the two is either 8 or 9 square feet was discussed at the council. As I look back at standard A-frame sign sizes out there, it seems like the extra 3 square feet is more of a standard size. And so staff would suggest doing 9 as aggregate. Next item was again for commercial areas along Shea to allow signs in the right-of-way adjacent to those commercial areas. Council discussed allowing the A-frame signs within 90 feet of the property in commercial areas and up to 1,000 feet in industrial areas. We'll come back and talk about those two things more specifically here in just a moment. And then to allow them on sidewalks as long as there was at least 4-foot clearance around the sign and 2 foot from curb. Currently, it's 3 foot from the curb. And that the sign be removed when the business is closed. So those are the basic changes that were proposed as we discussed this with council with regard to A-frame signs. Before we go on to some of the next examples that I have, any other things with regard to A-frame signs that any of the commissioners have identified that?
Just an opinion, I think the provision for A-frames on sidewalks should not be a provision at all. I think get them into the softscape or elsewhere, but not on the sidewalk, even if there is 4-foot clearance. And then just a facetious comment, an A-frame is technically 2 signs, so each A-frame is 12 square feet on its own, right?
When they're back-to-back, we have to still count it as one. Certain angle that's needed between them before.
That can be your comment?
No, it's an interesting.
Technically, I'm right.
Chairman, with regard to on the sidewalk, I can understand that in maybe a more suburban location, but when we're downtown in the town center area, a lot of times sidewalk is the place it needs to be, and the sidewalk is mostly wider, can accommodate that. But
So the reason I don't like it is if you trip into one, you're going to go over the top of the A-frame sign and it's going to collapse as you're going over it and you're going to land flat. I mean, I'm not one to be overly safe and cautious here, but I don't agree with putting signs out on side. If a sidewalk was placed, a sidewalk is placed for walking. It's not a place for signage. That's just my thought. Commissioner Dempster, or sorry, Commissioner Ford.
Just to comment on that, when you walk down the Avenue of the Fountains, that whole area, and it's, I don't know, I've never measured it, it's close to 8 feet, probably at 6 to 8 feet width. That's all sidewalk, and that's the only available space for businesses to put an A-frame sign. So I don't like signs in the sidewalk either, but there's plenty of room. And with some of the nooks and things, they can be placed in a very safe manner, but just for those businesses on the avenue, I think that's important to have.
Commissioner Corey.
Thank you. And yeah, I was just going to call out again. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it says allow in right-of-way, including Shea, is the amendment. Okay, but I think the points that we brought up with the safety on Shea is really important. And I know that I've done like cleanup on Shea with cleaning trash and whatnot, and just trying to cross the road is very dangerous. So that, in combination with the signs must be removed at the end of the day when the business is closed, that at that time it could get a little dark too. So I think there's a lot of safety issues there. I don't know about Shea right of way. And I would also include maybe, I mean, there's a lot of places on Saguaro that aren't really safe to be walking in the middle of that either. So, Shea for sure.
Okay.
So John, I'll amend my comment after Commissioner Dempster's feedback to say, I'm not in favor of A-frames in the walking path on a sidewalk, but if the condition is that there's a sidewalk and then it butts out around a tree well, or there's pockets, I'm all for that, but not in the primary walking path of a sidewalk, even if it is 6 or 8 feet wide.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that.
Let's look at some examples here of distances. So here's where we kind of started as we talked about this with the council and hadn't had a lot of time to look at it beyond this at that point. So here's an example on the avenue. You've got this building back in the back. And if they wanted to have an A-frame sign really out on the avenue so that it's visible to somebody walking on the avenue to help direct them to their business back there, that building's about 85 feet plus or minus back. And so that's where we came up with the 90 feet. That's kind of the starting number. See a similar thing over on Parkview where we've got the businesses set back. There's the parking between them and getting out to Parkview, and those are about the same distance from those businesses to get something out into the right-of-way. So that's, again, that 85, 90 feet is kind of that minimum distance if we're going to let them go out to the right-of-way. And again, at that point, you're not on premise. You're off premise because you're in the right-of-way. So then some other examples. Another spot that may benefit from having some additional signage out at the Fry's on West Shea. Given the topography and that site wall that's along Shea, in order to get something out where the motors can see it, you're going to need to be at least 125 feet from the property line. If you want to get over to the various intersections, you've got greater distances, but certainly at least 125 feet out to get past that wall so a sign can be visible. Another example, commercial center along Saguaro Boulevard here, that back building, if it wants to get, well, first of all, again, by the code, you can, when you're in the common commercial zone, as this is, any business within that common commercial area can put a sign anywhere in the common area. So right behind the property line, along the right-of-way would be fine for that business in the back, but if they need to really be out closer to the sidewalk or on the sidewalk with their sign so it can be visible, now we're talking about 280 feet for that back property to be able to get their sign out right along the street. Similarly, if we go up to this commercial area up at Glenbrook and Fountain Hills Boulevard, pick some of those further back businesses, and you can see the distances out to the corner, out to Fountain Hills Boulevard. So if we want to be able to accommodate businesses in that location and help them be more successful and get signage out where people can see it, you can see the types of distances that we need to include in the ordinance to allow for that. 90 feet won't really get them what they would be after. So now we're going to look at a couple of different situations here with the target center. Again, even a little bit more closely than that. Got 3 different zones we're going to look at. Let me see here. We've got, so the purples are property lines. So here is the property line for these businesses in here. And so if we're talking distances from the property line, we talk about what can happen there, what can happen there, and what can happen there based on different scenarios. So again, from the property corner here, if we went out 90 feet, these businesses, all these businesses back in here, there are about 17 of them, could put some signs right here just past the driveway into the bank. We wanted to allow them to go all the way out here to this corner. We'd need to go out to about 195 feet. Or if we came over to this location in through here, that's the shortest, about 130 feet again. That's similar to what we had over there at the Fry's parking lot. We were allowing that kind of distance. They could be putting signs in there to help get people into that driveway. And so here's some examples of what that could look like. First over at the corner with that number of businesses, if they were putting out signs. This one is the driveway going into the bank, and this one's the one up at the corner itself. And then if we go on over to the area here along the middle, again, signs could be out along the sidewalk there.
Sidewalk's not 6 feet wide,
It's 8 feet wide.
is it? That's terrible.
And then moving on over again, because the corner of that property comes up into here, so measuring from there, here's kind of a 90-foot area from that corner where signs could go, or if there's an interest in giving them the opportunity to get signs over here to the main driveway, we'd be talking about 195 to 270 feet. And here's, again, what those could look like. This one is along this main area in here, and the other's kind of at the corner. Any comments, questions on those?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to one that you may not have noticed here. And that's this sign. Or that sign. This is challenging to understand, but we can't review content. If we put in a provision such as this, and we say you can put it 90 feet from your business, if we can read the sign so we can identify the exact business, then we're free to measure that distance and see if they're within that distance. Otherwise, we can't really judge the content of a sign. So while it's not likely, again, people aren't really just going to go out and create crazy signs to put out and use up their sign allowance to advertise, whatever, but they could. Or in this example, somebody doing the garage sale or open house could take advantage of the fact that we really can't judge content and put those signs in with the others. So again, I don't know if that's a reason not to approve any of these things we're talking about, but just want to make sure the commission is aware of some of the impacts or some of the code challenges we may have in enforcement going forward with the provisions that are being considered.
So I'll take the first stab here, and we can get the conversation going, but I just have a macro statement, and I think we're trying to be all things to all businesses. And whatever happened to business complexes putting out their monument signs out at the street that says, hey, I've got Farmers Insurance inside this building, or, you know, business A, B, C, D, or E. That's a Commissioner Kovacevic's responsibility as you know, someone in that industry to bring that development and deploy that as a part of the asset. Some businesses at some locations, and a lot of these in these examples in the last few slides, if your business needs the visibility and the street presence, it's probably not the location for your business. So we don't need to, this is my opinion, right? But we don't need to accommodate the $12 a square foot rent business way back on Laser Drive with street front visibility on Shea, because if that business needs that, if that business is in the business of selling clothing or shoes or whatever it is, then they go up in the Bashas complex. They go where they get that foot traffic, they go where they get that visibility, they go where they get that branding with the location, and it comes as a component of the square foot that they ultimately pay. So I wholeheartedly disagree with trying to be all things to all businesses. Now, having said that, where I think the line is for me is to say, if I can visibly see your front door from where that A-frame sign is placed, and it's within, whatever we said, 75 feet or 90 feet, then I'm good with it. I think I can deal with that. But to have to be 200 feet away and go around the corner, it's never gonna happen. And we're just opening the door to something that's in nobody's interest, I think. So those are my thoughts. Commissioner Watts?
So first, I agree with you that the A-frame, to me, is two signs. You know, we may have to classify it differently, but it seems like it's two signs. In that spirit, though, does that eliminate a second sign because every A-frame is more than if we go with 9 feet, does that eliminate the second sign?
Chairman, Commissioner Watt, the section 607 describes how we measure signs and calculate the area. And basically it says if they're parallel faces, we don't count them as two signs. You have to be a certain angle between the signs this way before we count it as two signs.
But if it's 3 by 3, does that eliminate the second sign? If an A-frame, both sides are 3 by 3, it's 9 square feet per side.
Any one sign can be no larger than 6 still.
Okay, so it would eliminate the second sign, though, from an ingress and egress.
So if you have one at 6, you could have another one at 3 square feet.
Oh, to get to the 9.
Aggregate is 9.
Okay.
Right.
Secondly, I think when permits are pulled, there's a cost for signs that are on the buildings already. Does that count as a sign? Targets, Beals, Bells, Streets of New York, they all have signs out front, and there's a cost for those. Does that preclude them from being able to put up an A-frame or any other sign other than maybe a monument sign out on the right-of-ways?
As the ordinance is currently drafted, no, they're all considered independently.
But we have a two-sign, well, we do have a two-sign, we have a square footage limit too, and each of those would be larger than the square footage allowed. So would it by default preclude them from a sign, an A-frame?
Not the way it's currently worded, no.
Really? And, geez, I hate the clutter that's sitting there in the corner. It seems to me that the signs generally related to businesses are geared more towards small businesses as opposed to larger businesses that have their own marketing, they have their own flyers, they do a lot of advertising and so on. How about distance between signs? Can we set a distance between signs? We're going 90 feet from the property line, or whatever we come up with. Could we put distance between them so it doesn't get so cluttered?
Chairman, Commissioner Watts, we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later. We have a current provision in the ordinance that addresses that, but it's a challenge, particularly in a common commercial center such as this, to implement it or to enforce it. You come out here and we say you're supposed to be 20 feet between signs, and you have 3 signs and they're 5 feet apart. Well, who put the one out first? So which one created the violation? Okay, well, we've got to take them all in and go talk to all 3 and whatever, and anyway, it becomes difficult to enforce.
I brought the wrong notes, so I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Commissioner Dempster.
May I ask too about the signs will need to be removed when the business is closed? I would think that would be difficult to enforce as well with different hours of operation.
Chairman,
Is that-
yes, it would be a challenge to our code staff to be out at those hours to ensure it happens. It could be addressed over time, I think, as we would get complaints about it, to know which businesses then to go try to follow up with. We do it currently, I guess a similar thing with lighting complaints. We get those, so, okay, the code officer has to come in when it's dark, which in the summers is late hours for them, but, so a similar thing could happen.
Commissioner Corey? I was just going to say, I could think that could help to ensure that the signs that do end up out there are purposeful and not just left behind. Yeah, for sure. So when we say the business is closed, it's closed for the day. I don't know if we need to clarify that or not. We went out of business, so it's down. Is there more to this, John? I had a couple other comments, but I don't want to touch them unless we're continuing.
The next thing I had, which is just
Okay.
the similar thing down here on the laser drive, the chairman's kind of brought this up before already. What was discussed at the council meeting was 1,000 feet, but when we came back and actually measured it to get that rear property all the way out to something a little bit more visible in technology, it would really need to be 1,250. And just as a point of information, there are 21 businesses currently along that street. And here's the area at the end of the street where, potential signs could go, but limited. Again, it's unlikely that more than a few of the businesses would put signs out at the same time. It's not really likely to get as cluttered as some of these images we've put out look. So I don't want to be overly dramatic or seem like I'm trying to thwart the idea, but did want the commission to be aware of the potential that's there as you're giving consideration for this. With that, I think that's, from there I just get in again and repeat the numbers in case we need them again, and again, some of the challenges that we see that may come from the changes.
Okay, thank you. I try to think about this. I don't own a business, but if I did, I try to think about it from their perspective, and I think that the signs, if you're walking, if you're pedestrian, if you're on foot, they kind of bring a sense of community, and I understand that. And I hope that people also consider what it's going to make the town look like if there's too many. So I really hope that we can find a good balance here. I had a question around illumination. Can I ask that? Or okay, so signs shall be illuminated only during the hours that the associated establishment is open for business. I had this note from last time, so I don't know if that was changed. But that is in here, right?
So with regard to electronic message center signs that we'll get to, we have that discussion to have. I don't recall that it's anyplace else.
Okay, maybe I'll clarify. So is that in this, that's a different area? It's a different section?
Yes.
Okay.
I have to go back into 607 for the general illumination requirements. Temporary signs are not allowed to be illuminated at all. And then we have the provision for electronic message center signs and when they can be on and off.
Yeah.
But for just a general wall sign, I don't recall there's anything that limits those.
Okay, well, I see, I don't know what section that is. When a business is closed, the sign may continue to be lit, but may only display a static message except on the weekend?
Right, that's the electronic message center sign. We'll get there in a little while.
Okay. And then it was no later than sunset, I believe I read, for removal of the temporary signs. Is that still in there?
So with regard to again, we'll touch on each of these individually, but with the A-frames,
Okay.
that's when the business is closed. It's supposed to be removed.
But if they close after sunset, maybe it should be sunset or closure, because if it's dark and they're out there trying to collect their signs, that could be a safety issue.
Then I think we'd have to talk again about different areas, because if you're in the town center area, got more light along the
I see.
sidewalk in a pedestrian setting where people are still reading the signs.
It's a tough one. And then are we going to talk about the electronic message signs
We're gonna
later
get
as
there.
well? Okay, thank you.
Anything else on these? Again, I don't expect that we will necessarily get to answers tonight, but certainly want to see what comments you have and questions and direction you want to give us for adjustments, if any, to what's been proposed. So, anything else at this time? Okay. So then moving on through section 608, like the other sections, we'll just touch on each of these. Most of them we don't have any comments, but just to see if anybody else did. So 608A2 is awning or canopy signs. 3 is balloons. We had no proposed changes to those sections. Don't see anybody. Okay. Banner signs is next in 608A4. So some suggested changes here, mostly about increasing some of the display time. Currently, they're limited to 30 days in a calendar year. They don't have to all be at once. It could be 10 days here and 10 days there. A permit is required so we can track the number of days. The recommendation is that we increase that to 90 days per calendar year. And then add a seasonal waiver for non-residential uses in residential districts. So I think I included in the staff report a list of what those uses could be. The only one we really have or have of any degree is churches. And we do know that churches often have seasonal kind of activities, whether it's the Christmas program or the summer vacation school type things that they like to advertise for through temporary signage. A number of the churches in town have permanent frames out along the street where those temporary banner signs can be added. Certainly the current code has been a bit restrictive on that. And so that's the idea there. The way it was worded in the council discussion was providing a waiver. My interpretation of that, or the way we typically do that, is through administrative temporary use permit process to be able to track that type of waiver. Then another suggestion, a recommendation that was made through the council is if it's a new business that might not be ready to invest in the cost of permanent signage, that we allow for banner sign for a longer period of time. Discussion was everything from 180 days to a year, 364, 365 days. And so we'll be looking for direction on how long that would be.
I'm supportive of that, but I think that on the new business, in the new business area, I think we might consider requiring a change in messaging across that period of time. You know, the now open sign for 365 days is, yeah, I mean, it's almost kind of like helping a business with its marketing by saying, hey, change your messaging over. Just a thought. You know, saying you can throw the banner up for 365 days, but over that 365 days, the message needs to change at least one time or 2 times.
There.
Commissioner Watts.
I'm opposed to 365. I think 180 days is more than sufficient for a new business to establish itself. And if it hasn't established it, I'm not sure the additional 185 days is going to do much for them. I'd also like to know what the length of the waiver is. What's the time on the waiver?
Your mic's not on.
Again?
The red one. He doesn't have a red one.
No, nice try. Nothing's working.
There you go.
Now there is. I don't know. All right. Anyway, what's the length of the waiver? Okay, what's the length of the waiver, John?
That wasn't specified.
Okay.
in the
Shouldn't there be a
discussion.
duration?
We could either do that by prescribing maximum waiver lengths here, or we could just let it be up to the individual situation. That's up to the commission and ultimately the council and what they adopt.
And what constitutes a seasonal waiver? Because if I'm Hallmark, I've got one every month.
That's a good question. But might need further definition as we work on this.
I still buy almost from them. So anyway, 180 days is what I would support, and 90 calendar days a year in addition to the seasonal waivers without them being defined, to me, seems to me to be problematic. So I'd be concerned about that.
Just a comment on the seasonality, because our residents, we have many winter residents, I would actually be in favor of a longer period of time to have a sign. And I know there was some discussion about the maintenance, because a banner sign could look also pretty ratty after a long period of time as well. But in fairness, because of the seasonality of our residents, what's happening? Did you catch that? With maintenance and a longer period of time.
Can you clarify a longer period of time, longer than 180 days?
Yes, longer than 180, because if someone opens a business in June and they have to take their sign down, you know, they'll miss the seasonal folks that come in February and March. So longer than 180 days.
I mean, it's a good point that you raise, but that's like 6 months, so they would still have enough time to get them through the end of November. Hopefully, I think people are back by then. I'm not arguing with you, I'm just considering that.
Clear as mud?
Absolutely, as always.
So I'm not clear.
Oh, I'm not either.
We were talking about, Commissioner Dempster was talking about seasonal waivers, but you were really talking about new business having a longer duration than 180 days?
I was talking about seasonality of our residents, but in regards to banners.
Okay.
So we were talking about banners, and I stated that having them up for a longer period of time would accommodate our seasonality of our residents, and also would like to see a provision about general maintenance, having us sign up for an extended period of time.
That's why I like the messaging refresh, is that kind of, it does allow that period of time, but it's, you know, now open for 365 days is, tired. I'm already tired.
Okay.
So where do we land? Anywhere? Or is this comments where, food for thought, and you're going to
We're
consider each of
collating
these?
comments.
Okay.
Right, so I guess jumping ahead a little bit, what will happen from here is I'll go through and make changes that are clear changes. Otherwise, some of these things are still open, then a report will come back with, here's some of your discussion, and here's some additional options to consider based on your discussion. And sometime, either the next meeting or the meeting after, you are going to have to come to a conclusion, but you don't have to make it tonight. So moving on then, in 608, here's again a list of some of the next sections in line of types of signs. There are no proposed changes from the council or staff on any of these sections. Any comments or suggestions for modifications on any of these sections from any of the commission?
Yeah, John. Under the section on balloons, you made mention of it not being any higher than 6 feet from the ground. I've seen balloons hanging that were mounted up on top of roofs right down here on Avenue of the Fountains at Park Place. They were running a special or whatever and hung a balloon up. They literally went up to their roof and hung it up. Should we have something in here stating something to that effect? Was that something that is allowed, or?
Chairman, Commissioner DePaul, I guess I'd have to see it to know for sure, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like something that would have been a violation.
Okay.
If it's happening currently, however, we're not doing any enforcement of the temporary sign provisions until we can get it redone.
All right. Thank you.
Next, in line here, we have these sections of the code that currently have no provisions, but Commissioner Dempster, I believe you might have some comments or questions with regard to number 12, post and board signs. So,
Yes, I think we need to include this in the ordinance for our residents here that decide to sell their home. They should be allowed to have a post and board sign stating their home is for sale.
right, which we do, but I guess the
well,
current provisions
but
doesn't allow it to be in the
Not
right-of-way.
in the right of way, because no one knows where the right of way is.
Right.
So it has to be more friendly for the homeowner.
Okay. Comments, questions there? Okay, that's easy enough. Then we get to yard signs is the next one with some changes. So again, these are your pretty typical political sign. That's one way to look at it. Contractor comes and does some work in your yard or whatever, and they leave a little yard signs, little pegs that go into the ground. That's one of the main differences between an A-frame and a yard sign is these actually penetrate the ground versus sitting on top of the ground. So here it was suggested, currently the code is 1 per lot. Suggestion was we change that to 2 per lot. As we're talking about efforts to assist businesses in commercial areas, you might have a lot of businesses on one lot, as we just saw in a couple of situations. And if you're allowed, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 per lot, if you got 10 businesses, which businesses get to do that? So this hasn't come up before, but I'm wondering if we should modify this in commercial areas. So make a distinction, residential area it's 2 per lot. In commercial area, it's 1 per business, 2 per business, whatever the commission wants to recommend on that. Comments?
I like the idea of separating residential and business. And on a side note, a question, what would take precedent, an HOA that has rules about this versus the town? Would the HOA rules supersede what the town
Chairman,
states?
Commissioner Dempster, yes, the HOA rules could supersede, but they have to enforce them, the town wouldn't.
Right. Thank you. And this would be a temporary sign advertising the business, or,
Can have
or,
any message it wants.
okay, well, right. But a temporary sign.
We're talking yard signs
Yep.
Currently.
Thank you.
The council didn't specifically discuss it this way, but I went ahead and amended the ordinance to be similar to the A-frames in terms of the separation from the property lines and so forth. That may be overstepping what the council was looking at, but the gist of the discussion sounded to me like in order to provide as much opportunity to assist businesses as we could, I included the same types of language here in terms of the 90 feet from the property line for a commercial, 1,000 feet from industrial zoned property. So again, depending on what we do, the other, we may or may not want to do the same thing here.
Yeah, I
Comments,
agree with
questions?
mirroring.
Okay. So now we get to electronic message centers. So this is section 608B of the ordinance. So a few changes were suggested here. Currently, the code requires that there be a 8-second hold for any signed message before you change the message, basically trying to avoid animation. And something holds, a driver going by at whatever speed gets a chance to see it. It's not distracted by a lot of changes. The proposal is that we reduce that to 4 seconds. So I've looked around at other codes. They do vary somewhat. I have seen some less than 8, but most of them seem to be around that 8-second kind of time frame. But there's certainly no set standard or reason why it couldn't be reduced to the 4. One of the challenging pieces we had from the previous code, because it was based on a message and how to handle the message when a business was closed, we came up with language in the current code: when a business is closed, a sign may continue to be lit, but display only a static message. That's been a little bit of a challenge with one particular entity, and that's been the Chamber of Commerce. They represent a lot of businesses in town that are open a lot of times, and while they can't be doing off-premise advertising, there are events going on and so forth that they're trying to assist with, and part of what they're doing, even though their office is closed, they have those activities, so that has already been a bit of a challenge. The suggestion here was to add, except on the weekend, so a business may be closed on the weekend, could still advertise. So that's what we've put in here, but I believe I put in the staff report. Staff's not sure exactly what all that would mean. When does the weekend start and stop? What about a holiday? Should that be included in addition to weekends? Also looking for some further ideas and direction from the commission on how we might handle that one to achieve the goal there. I think we'll wait for the next bullet point till we've had that discussion, because it takes us in a different direction. Any comments there, or other ideas or comments about the electronic message centers and the regulations?
What drove the message interval reduction?
Just opportunity to get more messages out there, I believe.
Guess I'm in favor of holding at the 8. And on the second point, I'd actually go the opposite direction. I would say the message board needs to go dark at the coinciding with the end of business hours for the zoning district. If it's a 10 p.m. close of business doors, to me, the message board needs to go dark. No static message. Commissioner Dempster?
Do you have a comment on Chairman Gray's?
And I think what are we referring to here? We have how many in town? 2. We have the theater.
No, we have about half a dozen.
Oh, do we?
New one just turn on today.
New one at MCO.
Ah,
And
Oh,
the
okay.
church.
I think it's just important to consider, what these are going to look like at night. And I was recently at the chamber, and I was blinded by the light. It was so bright that it just kind of distracted everything around. So I think we just have to be really careful if we start to allow more and more of these, what that impact can be. So.
Chairman, going back to your comment for just a second, one of the questions or issues that we grappled with before when we did this is other businesses that have wall signs that are lit. We don't require them to be turned off at night. And so, they may do it, but they're not required to be turned off. And so singling these out versus those was a bit of an equity question that we had.
I see them as different.
My comment has to deal with dark skies, and I know you contacted them, but these are not dark sky compliant, correct?
Yes, they are.
They are?
Yes. The values that are put on the light levels do change day versus night, and the nighttime levels are dark sky compliant. Now, they can seem very bright, as Commissioner Corey has just pointed out. We've had the chamber sign monitored several times to verify it, and it is compliant.
Commissioner Watts?
I think I'm in agreement with the 8 seconds. if we look at the flashing stop signs, they're designed to get your attention, but they're a distraction at the same time. And if I'm driving down the road, I don't really want a distraction to have something to catch my attention so that I'm not paying attention to traffic as much. So the proximity of the stop signs is one thing and the flashing, but I'm a proponent of sitting with the 8 seconds. And is the building code establish a specific lumen output on the lights?
The zoning ordinance does.
The zoning does?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, as long as it's compliant. But, yeah, 8 seconds.
So Commissioner Corey, coming back to one of your comments there, the other thing that came up at the commission was, yes, maybe we want to make these adjustments for signs that are existing, but maybe we also want to prohibit any additional signs. And so that's kind of the next piece of that that we would have to discuss. I guess I got ahead of myself there a little bit. Here's some of the comments we had. If we were to do that, we'd have to think about how we'd handle electronic fuel message signs, because those are basically electronic message signs. They just display one message. Currently, there's only one in town, but others could want them. But otherwise, if we were to make that change, staff would propose that we do 2 things to the code. One is to go into 607C, add a new number 4. Now, this is the section on nonconforming signs, to make the existing signs nonconforming, and they can continue as those nonconforming signs, and then add electronic message centers to the list of prohibited signs in 607E. So that's what we would do if the commission and council want to go that way, to prohibit future signs.
I have no opinion. I do have an opinion that I think that is something we should look into because over time, if we have more of these come into town, it's not going to be, I don't think it's the direction that we want our town to head into. And, for a business, it's great because you're getting more visibility and people are able to see your sign. It's lit up and you can do some very creative things with it. But from an aesthetic standpoint, for residents and other people that may not own businesses, I think there's many other more creative and beautiful ways to highlight a business and to advertise a business. And I would just really like us to consider not having provisions in to allow more of these to come into town. And if we have an opportunity now to say that this is the limit, then I think we should.
I agree with Commissioner Corey as far as the aesthetics, and I think about the town of Carefree. You drive by and they don't have any neon signs, and it does create a certain look. On the other hand, I think that, visibility for businesses is extremely important, but when I see some of these signs, it tells me the time of day and it tells me the weather, and I don't need an illuminated sign to tell me the weather and the time. So, my 2 cents.
Yeah, and just something else to consider, like who is the audience of these signs? So I could see if we were in a place where there's a lot more transient people that were kind of coming and going from different places and it was new to them to see that. Oh, wow, look what they have to offer. I should take a look at that. But we all live here and we know what they offer. Like when I drive by the theater sign or the chamber sign, I'm not looking at it because I know what's going on. So, just something else to think about.
And you're driving.
Yes. And you're driving.
Any thoughts or comments here?
So nobody objected to the, or nobody commented, I should say, on turning signs off at the end of the business hours for that commercial district. I'm just curious if anybody else has thoughts on that. I actually really like that. Static message, scrolling message, no message. There's no businesses open, especially in C0, C1, even C2 environments. There's no reason those signs need to be illuminated.
So one of the signs we have is for a church. I'm not sure
It does time and
when they're
weather.
open. Just as an example, again, I don't know what their hours
Well,
are. So
but I'm not saying it has to coincide with the business's hours. I'm saying with the zoning restrictions, you know, start to finish of the business day. So what's C1 is,
C1 and CC are the other ones that have the hours. Nothing else has hours attached to it.
okay, then
And that church signs in residential.
I don't think they need to stay on past the C1, 11 PM or 10 PM, whatever it is.
There's no traffic on the road anyway. You know, about after 8 o'clock, initially I was a proponent of prohibiting any additional electronic signs, but I think a kind of a middle ground is to say the hours, if you restrict them to even 8 o'clock. I mean, how many people are in town after 8 o'clock driving? The streets roll up around here, and there's no activity. So stop them from 8 o'clock till 6 in the morning anyway.
Yeah, and add to that, dark skies, no street lights. You don't need distractions after dark around here. You need to be looking ahead.
I don't dislike that idea, but there's a part of me that feels like that's controlling content and, you know, we're turning off their content. I don't know if that falls under that category, but
You have to pick up your A-frame.
I have to pick up my A-frame, yes. Just,
But the reality is they're not even there. Those businesses have all closed. So even if you tied it to closing, it would be sequential. Some businesses would be closing, they'd be shutting their signs down, and you may have a kind of a median number of 8 o'clock. Maybe it's 8:15, but, you know, fundamentally, I don't think there's much traffic after about 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I'll agree with my commissioner to the right here. This is tough for me as a business owner also that has a sign that's illuminated at night and stays on all night. But I do have compassion, and I've read all the comments. But I think on this particular, with the electronic sign, I think that would be just fine to have those off, depending on what the time is, because I'm in agreement with it. Nobody's out at night, not even me. And yeah, I don't think that would be a big deal.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that if it's related to the time, then maybe the issue of the business being closed on the weekends, go ahead and have it illuminated during the day on the weekends, as long as we turn them off at night from whatever time we end up with, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, till 6, 7 in the morning. Okay. We'll look at something along that line to bring back to you then. So we mentioned this earlier.
Well, I'm sorry, I just want to reinforce the most important thing to me here would be the 8 seconds too. I really don't want to see that cut to 4. I'm okay with the rest of the direction. I've only heard Commissioner Gray and Watts talk about the 8 seconds, and I would throw my hat into that ring too.
So the next thing I have on my list is section 608C, 1, with regard to the temporary sign allowances. So we touched on this briefly earlier, Chairman, with regard to provisions to control the aggregate number and size of signs. So this is what we have currently in the code, but it's been a challenge to try to enforce. In fact, we haven't used it at all because it would work if you had one business on one property. But when you have multiple businesses on one property, such as over here at Fountain Plaza side, then each business needs its sign along Saguaro to try to then get the separations and limit the numbers and who signs here and which is first and so forth. It's really been, at least this way of doing it has been impossible to do. So we're proposing at this point to remove this from the ordinance, but we could look at, if as we look at these other changes, Commission would want us to keep this or look for ways to tweak it to try to limit clutter, we could see if there are some other options, but it's very challenging to enforce.
I think this is where we transpose, and I don't begin to understand how we do it, but I guess I'm in agreement with deletion of this, but in replacement, this is where we really push for development monument signage.
So along that line, Chairman, when we did this code, we did increase the allowance for monument signage with that idea in mind. If we can increase that, then maybe there'd be less need for temporary signs. We haven't talked about it here. We skipped over it. Nobody brought it up as we went past it, but we could look at doing even more of that potentially as a way to facilitate the necessary signage. The challenge, of course, with that is that's a lot more expensive than these alternatives.
Agreed. But it's the tasteful way to advertise.
I think you get into potentially some problems because of the size and the obstruction that will, it conflicts a bit with line of sight again, so you gotta be careful about that. But are all of the signs that we're talking about, do they require a permit, or they're just ad hoc, they can put out the signs?
So, Chairman, Commissioner Watts, currently the only temporary sign that requires a permit is a banner sign.
Okay,
We previously had, prior to my being with the town, permit requirements for A-frame signs. And they were in place for a number of years and became increasingly difficult to implement and to monitor and whatever, I don't know what all the challenges were. But it may be an option we'd want to look at again to help keep rogue signs out where they don't belong. Or
it does seem like you have to have some mechanism to be able to enforce, and there's nothing here. So if you had a permit, while it's onerous on the person putting the sign out, if you had an annual permit, so to speak, then you would have some, just like we have on the building permit, you can call in and you can pull a permit over the internet. You could call in and trigger your sign permit that you're going to have this period of time, and then the compliance officer can look at it and say, okay, he was here, he was here, he was here, he wasn't here, that sort of thing. I don't want to make it more onerous, but finding a simple mechanism for enforcement, because right now, what we're talking about, we've got no way to measure or manage.
So typically what happens with that, Commissioner Watts, is if they get some kind of decal, they put the decal on the sign, and the code officer says, okay, it's got a decal, it's a valid decal, and goes from there. Find a sign without decal, then they deal with that.
But you still don't have the time component. So when you have the proliferation of signs, you don't have who was here first. You would if you had an online mechanism to say, here's my time period where I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to trigger it at that point. So
Possibly, that may still be a bit of a challenge because a lot of them put them out every day.
right,
Anyway, yeah,
something to think about.
right. We've been reluctant to go there again based on the challenge we've had in the past, but I've kind of felt that may be a direction we're going to need to go. And we can look at that if the commission would like for us to, and bring back some ideas with regard to permits.
John, I'm just curious about this. That large screen sitting on the corner of Beeline and Shea, is that within the city, the town limits? Okay.
Okay, last one, 608D. Basically, residential directional signs is what they were originally called. We changed the name a little bit. This has to do with replacement for garage sale or open house kind of signs. See the proposed changes that were suggested there. The main thing is to increase the number allowed from 1 on the lot plus 3 to 1 on the lot plus 5 to provide more opportunity. And then currently they are limited to daylight hours and only on weekends. And suppose we take that out so that they can be up anytime. And in the right of way except for Shea Boulevard, and 2 feet from the curb instead of 3 feet from the curb.
I am definitely in favor of the increase from 3 to 5. here in town for open house signs.
I think this is the one area of signage that's well policed anyway, so I'm not concerned here.
Not concerned other than proximity. You know, if there's one on every corner and there's garage sales that compete and there's houses that are for sale, if we had some distance requirement between the open house signs, then to me, that would make a little bit more sense for you don't get that clutter going on, just like we have on Shea, like we were looking at earlier.
Those weren't real pictures.
I know they weren't.
Okay.
I know they weren't. You know, just,
And
are you
it-
testing? I mean, it's okay.
Just,
so.
just saying. But the reality is, we don't often have a lot of sign clutter. And here's a test. This sign ordinance was repealed in January. And so it was a free-for-all for months and during our busiest time. And we didn't, in my opinion, and I do drive around, I do have open houses and attend them, and I didn't see a huge amount of, I mean, there's always going to be someone that's going to put it on the median. They don't know the town, they don't know our ordinance, they come from out of town, or whatever the case may be. But I didn't see a lot of clutter and a lot of breaking the potential rules or whatever.
I think I disagree a little bit. I didn't see a quantum leap, but I've seen an increase in the proliferation of signs. So I don't know that the for sale signs or the open house signs are going to be the problem there. So 3, 5, I can see where you're back in further in town, coming off of Shea, then 5 makes a lot of sense if you're close, but I don't think you can discriminate and say, well, you can have 3 and you can have 5. So I'd go with a 5. I'd be fine with that.
Anybody else?
No, but I just want to comment, it is an interesting point that I hadn't considered until Susan brought it up, that realtors can come in from out of town and not know what our ordinance is and just put them wherever they want. So I would say we probably wouldn't want to be too different from what other towns typically do.
Susan, does it help to say 3 from 2 different directions? And does that help mitigate Commissioner Watts's perspective?
I don't think so, because, I recently had a listing on Cholula, way up in North Heights. So you go from Palisades and Golden Eagle, that corner. You have to turn on Sierra Madre. You have to, there's so many turns. It's not possible to properly provide directions to someone that's looking for the location. And that would be just trying to get the quickest way. I mean, you could go Sunridge, but even if you come down Sunridge, and you have to have some along the way so people don't kind of go off in a different direction, not knowing where they're supposed to turn. Just the practicality of how spread out things are.
I think as we talked about it's going to come down to common sense. No realtor is going to put out more signs than is necessary to get traffic there, not generally speaking. So if it becomes a problem, let's not fight something that isn't a problem today and wait till it becomes a problem and then address it.
And may I mention, we do have Rebecca Grossman with SAR, Scottsdale, Arizona Association of Realtors, has been so supportive with this. And when agents talk with her, she does educate the agents. So we do have some assistance there.
Okay, anything else on this one? I think we're almost done. Just a reminder again that we can't really regulate the message that are on the yard signs. They get out in the right of way to, at least in theory, be advertising garage sales or open houses. Most people are pretty good about it. So with that, we're done with this review. We will take these comments and Before we totally end this session, because we're going to need a motion from you to continue it, the question is to when, whether it be your May meeting or your June meeting. We'll talk about this in a little bit when we get down to that item, like we usually do, but we have 4 or 5 items already for your May meeting in terms of rezoning special use permit applications. So I'm not sure how much you would want to do. We could continue it to the May meeting and then just continue it from then if it's too much, would be one approach, or go ahead and continue it to June. Up to you. The longer we do it, the more time we'll have to respond to comments, but I think several of these are going to take 2 or 3 meetings here to kind of talk through before we're really going to get to a final decision. So argue it the other way, so the sooner we kind of start tackling them, the better. But
I think we would just motion to continue to May, but give staff discretion to push that out to June if.
well, yeah, once we do that, we'll need to have it on the agenda. It may be with another continuance.
Fine. And you could just request a continuance at that point if needed. Would you prefer that, or do you just prefer to go to June?
That probably is better, that we do it that way, so that way we can continue some discussion, even if it's maybe just a few pieces of the whole thing.
Okay. I'll go ahead and just make the motion then. Agenda item.
Sorry, Chair, for interrupting again. Did you check to see if we have any comment cards?
Do we have any comment cards?
No, Chairman.
Thanks, John. Okay, go ahead and make the motion to continue agenda item 7, amending chapter 6, signage regulations to the May planning and zoning venue. Second, commissioners?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
7-0.
Thank you. 8, commission discussion, request for research to staff.
We had one item on here that we need to see if you want us to research or not, or work on. We had a recent inquiry for a business license for a tattoo shop parlor in town. It's not a specifically listed use in our zoning ordinance. I could, as a zoning administrator, fairly easily determine it's a C2 use, and we could proceed with that in mind. But given some of the general concerns we've had in town about various uses, I wanted to at least come here and see if the commission felt this was something that ought to have more regulation than that. I've done some look in other communities, mostly don't find any regulations that other communities have for this particular industry. There are a few that have some minor kind of qualifiers. So the option would be make it a special use permit, again with some criteria, whatever those may be, or even by right, but with some criteria that go with that. Want to test the waters here?
I didn't know you were branching out. Really? Good for you. Commissioner DePauw?
What are the normal hours of business for tattoo parlors? I don't know. I've never.
Commissioner, I don't know. I would think most of them are maybe a mid-morning to late evening kind of operation, but.
Okay, so it's never 24 hours. It's never open all
I would
night.
say it would never be 24 hours. I think it would be unlikely to be 24 hours in a community such as this, but.
Commissioner Watts?
I think it's going to be hard pressed to allow a rifle range in town and not a tattoo shop.
Exactly.
So I think from an administrative standpoint, simplest thing is to use the staff's discretion. And if it fits, because if it doesn't, then it's going to be it's not going to be compliant with other issues. It's not going to be like, and I hate to specify parts of town, other parts of other cities, but there's some rough neighborhoods that there's tattoo shops. But on the other hand, there's some really elegant tattoo shops, and they're nice. So what are we going to do? A hookah shop is not going to be approved. A tattoo shop, you know what? So
Yeah.
I think it's administrative.
I would agree.
All set.
Yeah.
Right.
We allow smoke and vape shops.
Okay, thank you.
And question for you, if we're still on the research part, the hotel, whatever it's called, Fountainside Hotel, is that coming to us?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay, that was my
One of the
question.
items on your May agenda.
On the May agenda? Okay, thanks.
How do we get involved in town logo design?
Come to the meeting, council meetings?
Can that come through the zoning commission? Can it, please? Scott has impeccable taste. We got two guys up here in designer shirts.
Or how about Realtor education? Sounds like we might need Realtor education too.
Should we keep going? I'm kind of serious, though. I'd like, I'd like that logo to come through the zoning commission. All right. Summary of commission requests from John.
So I didn't hear any of those, but I'll go ahead and jump to 10 because we was kind of combine those report. So as kind of indicated a moment ago, and Vice Chair, so one of the items that you'll have next month, if everything continues as currently anticipated, Plaza Fountainside Hotel being rezoned to C2 with a special use permit to make it apartments. And then I also have a special use permit for multifamily at the southeast corner of Glenbrook and Fountain Hills Boulevard, that vacant corner lot for 10 units. Farhad has a special use permit for a cell tower. That will be, oh, that's one it's not going. A special use permit for elderly care facility, and a rezone for some property on Tombstone where they, residential lot, they wanted a little bit bigger house and would fit on the lot, and they couldn't do that without buying more land, so they did that. The piece they bought needs to be zoned the same as the rest of the lot to make it work. So those are your two items, and hopefully the annual report for the general plan.
So signs are going to June.
I don't know.
Okay. We're adjourned. Thanks, John.
Thank you.